Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy weekend, whenever you are joining me, whenever you are joining me. I am glad you are here for this next episode of With Purpose. Hey, this is the podcast where we take just a few minutes to learn something together, to think about maybe something hard associated with business or life. And then we spend some time planning together to make sure that the time we invest in our next weeks or months ahead is well invested. So, this week on With Purpose, I want to talk about fishing, and specifically, I want to tell you just a little bit of a story of what I got to experience a couple weeks ago and what I took from it while I had some time to think during it. A couple weeks ago, I got to go on an amazing fishing trip with my father, my brother, one of my sons, and two of my brother's sons. It was a fantastic trip. We flew up to Alaska, and we spent some time fishing for king salmon and halibut and rockfish. Stayed in this really amazing lodge. It was awesome because we just had such a great time together. And because it was 40 degrees and raining there, and it was like 110 degrees here in Wichita at the time. So it felt good to get away, even though felt pretty chilly. That was actually enjoyable to me. So it was beautiful scenery, of course. If you've never been to Alaska, highly, highly recommend you make it up there. Anyway, so we went there on a fishing trip. And, I am not much of a fisherman, honestly, because around here, fishing is not active enough, at least the way I do it, to keep me engaged. It is a lot of casting, waiting, seeing the same scenery around the small pond that you're sitting at. Like, that's, for a lot of people, very relaxing. But for me, it's just not engaging enough. This fishing was quite different because we're in this vast area in the Inner Passage in Alaska. Beautiful scenery, constantly changing weather, and a much more active version of what fishing looks like, right? And so, here in Kansas, our ponds might be 10 or 12 feet deep. Sometimes you can see the bottom. Usually not. It's pretty muddy. You can't really see the bottom here, but not very deep. And in Alaska, sometimes it was 700 feet deep. Other times it was 50 feet deep. And so you had to think about the different strategies to use when you're fishing in these different depths of water. But most of the time, what we would do is we would add some bait, a little weight to our lines. We'd throw it out, and we would let that sink until it hit the bottom. And then we would reel up 10 or 12 reels, bringing it up 10 or 20 feet off the bottom, and then we would let it drift back down to the bottom, and we would just repeat this, right? And the whole trick to fishing in Alaska is, one, making sure you do that in a way that makes the bait look real. But two, it's really just about time on the bottom. It's about how long can you keep the bait that's on your hook in the zone where the fish are going to hang out, in the opportunity area. Right? So time on the bottom equates to the number of fish you ultimately catch. And that's the whole game. So I had a lot of time to think about what's this mean in the business world as I was out there casting, rolling my line in, letting it sink back down, focusing on time on the bottom. And I came away with a couple takeaways. First, I think that's actually a lot like what entrepreneurship is like. We have these ideas for new services in business, new product that you want to sell, whatever it is. And we can get pretty excited about that. But ultimately, unless somebody buys that product, it's just an idea. The only way they are ever going to buy that product, though, is if you get the right bait in the right zone for long enough that everything outside of our control also lines up. Because that's the part that is uncomfortable about fishing. There was mornings where we did absolutely everything right, but you know what? The fish, we could see them. They were there, but they weren't hungry. They didn't want to buy it. They didn't want to eat that morning. And so we caught no fish for a couple hours until they got hungry. And so it's like this time on the bottom is what allows all of the market conditions to eventually line up in a way that results in sales, new business for us. So from that whole experience, this is what I took away. First, when we are fishing for a new business opportunity, we need to give it an appropriate window. So we can't expect things to happen immediately. We are going to have to take some time to experiment and figure out what the right bait is, but then also give it enough time to be in the marketplace to determine if it's really going to work or not. We can't make that judgment too fast, which I am guilty of doing. I am not a patient person, like I said, and so my inkling is to pull the plug on new ideas too quickly. Second thing we can be doing is watching for clues. And so it was really interesting, the guides that we were with. They had all sorts of things that they were watching that would tell them where we needed to be fishing, how we needed to be fishing, what bait to use, clouds in the sky, different fish they saw in the water, what the birds were doing, what the ocean currents were doing. I mean, it was pretty amazing to see how much science there really was to some of what we did. Lots of luck, but there was some science. And I think the same thing can exist in business. And this skill only comes from time. So there is not a textbook that any one of those fishing guides read that gave them all the shortcuts to how to know that. Each and every one of them had been fishing in that same area, most of them for a decade or more. And it is that experience that allowed them to see all of these things happening around them that all of us just missed or didn't relate to what we were doing. The same thing is true in business. So as we spend more time in the marketplace, I think we constantly pick up on these cues as to what's happening in the undercurrent. And we have to be in tune with those, and we have to add that to our calculus as we're thinking about how long do I spend at the bottom? How long can I get my bait in the water? Lastly, it's okay to call it. So they would decide, these guides would decide in advance how long they were going to give it at any certain fishing spot before they decided to move to the next one, because sometimes it's just not going to work. You want to make sure you give it enough time, but deciding in advance took the pressure off to either call it too early or say, oh, let's just give it 10 more minutes. Let's just give it 10 more minutes. Let's just give it 10 more minutes, and perpetually extend whatever the test is that they were doing or that we were fishing for, or what test is that you're doing. Or to constantly extend whatever the experiment it is you're running, or for us, the fishing that we were doing that wasn't working. So deciding in advance, what are the metrics that you're going to use to measure success in the marketplace, and how long do you reasonably expect you should give that before you'll see results? So decide that in advance really allows us to make a good decision to cut things off when we've given it the time on the bottom, we've watched for the signs, but it's just not going to work today. It's okay to call it. Okay, so those are the things I took away from my fishing trip. I think they kind of relate to business. I certainly do for me. And, I've been thinking about some of the experiments we're running in our organization right now in relation to these. And there's a couple that I think it's time to call it. And then there's others that I need to give it more time on the bottom. I need to give this great idea we have more opportunity to develop and see if it can become ultimately fruitful. So now is the moment in our episode where we move on into our moment of planning, and we always start this time with gratitude. I am really grateful for the 3 kids that Aaron and I have together. Each of them is so incredibly different, and they bring joy, pain, challenge, frustration, but mostly joy to us so often. And it's really such a great privilege to get to see them grow up and become these mini adults with passions and skills that are so unique and beautiful. So I'm really grateful for that this week. What are you grateful for? Something that I am not grateful for is all the crap that I just got to do, that I don't want to do, but I got to do it. And so I make it a point every week to write the few things down that I've been putting off. And this is your opportunity to do that for yourself. Take a minute to just think through your schedule from last week, your to-do list that's left over, what needs to be carried forward and just has to be done. Take some time, write it down, put it on your schedule. First question for today is, what experiments are you running currently that you need to give more time on the bottom to? Maybe you're feeling frustrated with something, or maybe something's working amazingly, but it really hasn't been in the market long enough to test it and see when it might not work as well. What's something you need to give more time to? Second, what do you need to call? I know there's things that we've tried in our organization that we let linger for far too long before we moved on to another promising opportunity on our potential list. We were giving resources at that point. We were giving time at that point to something that was ultimately going to provide no return, and I think we knew it. So what are those things for you and your organization, and how are you going to cut them off this week? All right, that's it for this week's episode of With Purpose. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a great time fishing. Learned a little bit of something about my business too. Fun how that works. Be open this week to lessons like that. Oftentimes, there's all sorts of metaphors and analogies and allegories and things happening in our life that we can take learning from one avenue or one venue into another, and it brings new amounts of color or life to things that we may already know, but gives us new ways to think about it. So be open to that this week. If you come up with a good one, send it my way. We can talk about it here on a future episode of With Purpose. Speaking of that, we'll be back next week, and I hope to see you then. Bye.